everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Dylan Golby and welcome to another video. In this week's video I want to talk a little bit about a few skills that don't actually require a camera to master. So of course in photography we need to master our equipment, so we need to know how a camera works, how our lenses work, how the various settings affect our images. We also need to know how to communicate with our subject if our discipline requires that, or perhaps how to interpret the subject if that's the sort of path that we've chosen. We also need to understand light and things like that and how they affect our images. However, I would say that there are a few things that really need to be mastered that don't actually involve the camera itself, and those would be patience, will, and the openness to let things happen. So let's discuss those today. The spark for this video actually came when I was out at Dumurmori again. I'd cycled out there with a good friend of mine to do some photography in the early morning, and you might remember this location from a few weeks ago when I talked about carrying camera gear while you're out cycling. And so we'd headed out there to make a few photos, and in the hope, just as a lot of people, that the small island in the river would be surrounded by fog and we'd be able to make some interesting compositions of that. And so that's a really beautiful scene, and you get dozens and dozens of people out there to bag a very specific shot. When we arrived at the location, there were maybe 50 or 60 people along the shoreline, basically lined up with their cameras pointed in the same direction, and a couple of people who had put on some waterproof trousers and were brave enough to wade out into the frigid waters of the morning. But we sat back and just sort of watched things happen. The fog was very, very thick when we arrived, and it didn't really look like we were actually going to be able to see anything for quite some time. As the sunrise time passed and the sun rose behind the mountains, but the fog didn't show any signs of clearing, one by one the people started walking away. They weren't going to get what they'd come for, and so they decided just to go home empty-handed. In the end, there were only about 10 people, including us, left along the riverside, and we were safe in the knowledge that, first of all, we really didn't mind not getting that exact shot. We'd come all the way out here just to see what would happen, and secondly, we also knew that as the sun rose and it got a little bit warmer, typically the fog would start to burn off and hopefully we'd see something interesting. So we decided to wait, since we'd already been there for about an hour in the freezing cold, and really didn't mind if we went home with the shot or not. I see this quite a bit when I go to locations that have been photographed frequently. People go there with the anticipation. They've seen a photograph, they've seen this beautiful light, they've seen this one moment, and they go there to try and recreate that. And if they don't come home with that shot, they tend to go home empty-handed, a little bit disappointed, or maybe come back and just continuously try to recreate that shot. But if you're willing to spend the time and just see what happens, you can often get something unique, something a little bit different. And that's what we decided to do this day. Now, last time I was there, you might remember a photograph of a man in a boat rowing through the river. Now, we don't really see rowboats in Korea at all, but there's one gentleman who rows out and just checks on this boat that they've put in the water, so that basically photographers can come along and get a photo of this nice old boat with the sails up and things like that. And he tends this, and so I wasn't expecting him to be rowing out again this morning, as he'd already installed that boat and got it ready for everybody. However, he did come out just to check on it right at the end, and I ended up with some really beautiful shots that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't patient, if I hadn't waited around and been open to another kind of shot. This sort of patience pays off in things like street photography, when you're waiting for all the elements to align in a pleasing way, or maybe even portraiture, when you wait for an expression to fully form on your subject, or for something like landscape photography, when you might wait for light or the correct wave, or maybe a bird to fly through your scene or something like that. And so trusting that something will happen, even if it's not exactly what you hoped for, and having the patience to wait that out is a really important skill in photography, I think. Sometimes just waiting isn't enough, and if you have the ability to control a certain situation, sometimes expressing your will can allow things to happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. A couple of years back, when I was last in India to work on my Tattoos of Asia project, we'd visited a small village in the hopes of finding a few subjects for the project, and it turns out that none of them were home. Most people were out in the fields working for the day, but the few people that we did speak to said, yes, we have people who live here that you could probably meet, they'll be willing to talk to you. And so My guide was a little bit frustrated. He wanted to get home early. We'd sort of been out all day and we hadn't really come back with anything. And I said, no, look, let's be really patient here. And I pushed a little bit and said, look, let's hang around for a couple of hours and see what happens. After a couple of hours, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, people began to trickle back into the village after their day's work. And we spotted a couple of people that we might want to talk to. So we approached one young lady who said that, yes, she'd absolutely love to talk to us, tell us her story, and she wouldn't mind being photographed. But right now, she was tired, she was sweaty, she wanted a meal and to have a shower and basically get herself a little bit more presentable and in the right state of mind to be able to talk to us. So she invited us back to her home the following morning, and we left the village in the knowledge that, yes, we were going to be able to come back and speak to this one person. Now, honestly, it couldn't have been any better, because when we arrived in the morning, she'd actually gone around and told all her friends and said, look, hey, we have this guy coming in, he'd really want to talk to us and listen to our stories and stuff. Would you all gather at my house for breakfast and we'll do this together? And so I actually ended up with some of my favorite photos from the entire trip and some of my favorite stories as well. So that willingness to push a little bit and say, look, this is what I really want and I'm willing to put in the time to get it, really pays off at times. Sometimes, however, no amount of patience or willpower will make a situation change. And I think a really good example of that is the weather. Literally, there's nothing you can do to influence the weather. In a recent video that I made in Soroksan National Park, I'd actually headed out to try and make the best of the drama that a passing typhoon was going to offer. And what I was hoping for was to take the cable car up to the top of the mountain there and be able to get, clouds passing between the pines and the rocks up there, and maybe do some long exposures, get a few sort of wispy motions going through those clouds, and really make some nice sort of deep, dark, black and white images. And when I got there, I was definitely rewarded with certain things like that. But as I waited and waited and waited, I got really, really lucky as the clouds just parted for a few minutes before the sun went down, and I was basically given this light show, just streaming warm light coming through those clouds, backlighting everything and giving it a whole new kind of drama. Now, it's not something I could have changed, it's not something I could have waited out knowing it was going to happen, but I was open to it and almost missed it because I really wasn't ready for it to happen. But being open to that fact that, what you went to get maybe isn't going to happen, but being able to react to the situation and come back with some images you're really happy with is another really important skill. As photographers, I believe that it's really important for us to have a vision and the will and confidence to execute that vision. But it's also really important that we're open to things that may come to us and maybe even augment our vision in a better way. It's also really important that we're patient enough to be able to see those things through. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments about a time when maybe one of these skills has paid off for you. Maybe you were out doing some street photography and you outweighted everybody and came home with exactly what you were after. Or maybe you were sitting down for a pint at dinner with some friends and jumped out of that dinner as the light began to get really good and made the best of an opportunity. So please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear some good stories. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll stick around for the slideshow at the end. If you haven't already, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see more videos like these. Cheers!